Paranormal in Pennsylvania may discuss topics such as suicide, murder, and other potentially upsetting things. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Paranormal in Pennsylvania,
where we discuss history and hauntings.
Today we have a very special guest, Kevin Lagowski, who's going to talk to us about a book on haunts in Chester County. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Erica.
Let's get into it. So, as I said today, we have author Kevin Lagowski with us, who has written this book, Ghosts and Eerie Legends of Chester County. Kevin, thank you so much for being here. I know this is your second book. You're located in Chester County, and if people want to meet you, they can actually meet you May 3rd, 12 to 3 at the Barnes& Noble in Exton. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever been a very special guest before anywhere, so I really appreciate it. And it's fun to see somebody holding up the book and all that, and hopefully enjoying it. Yeah, this is a fun thing to write about, like what's right here in my backyard. And there's definitely no lack of history and haunted history in all of Pennsylvania and the southeast corner where I'm at.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, the idea of there being so many haunted locations, how did you pick what you wanted to include in this book?
Just kind of started with kind of brick and mortar buildings that were still around from hundreds of years ago, since we kind of have that luxury or kind of cool element in this part of the country, especially, and just kind of research. Just started going to the library. It's as simple as that to like find out more. Just knew the county pretty well from my travels, even before I lived in it. But and then also just kind of like a graveyard fiend, I guess. I knew about things like the ticking tomb already, and just wanted to explore like what other, because that seems like it would be like kind of the most haunted place, right? It's like old buildings and graveyards, and then just sort of go from there. And then it was just finding old resources about folklore and legends, things like Sandy Flash that I didn't know anything about, some random cryptid that we have in Chester County. Just kind of expanding from there, because it's not just limited to folklore or the haunted graveyards. And I just kind of try to keep it within the confines of Chester County too. So if it were to be all of Pennsylvania or some bigger area, that would have been overwhelming. I just wanted to kind of start local with this.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me, some of the smaller locations, it's really easy to think of, like you said, like battlefields and things that are
Yeah.
big, but you have smaller ones that I think are less heard of, even growing up in Chester County, like the Stottsville Inn. So it was really cool
Mhm.
for me as someone that grew up locally to see smaller locations like that.
Yeah, there's some places I only became aware of as I was researching the book, and they're 25 minutes or so from where I live. So I really, Google Maps is your friend, that sort of thing. Just kind of go around in different little pockets and areas, townships of the county, and just, oh, here's a restaurant. What's the deal with that? If you just search tavern or restaurant or just any kind of, point of interest or whatever, it's kind of at your fingertips. And then you can go out and look at it yourself. That's the benefit of doing something local. Try to make it for, people in the area that they can make a little road trip and maybe not hit all 30 plus sites or whatever, but just the 5 or 6 that appeal to them, or then do that and then go another day to 5 or 6 more. It was really fun learning about the local history, and some places there's some history and maybe not overly haunted, but I still wanted to include it just as a nod to the general area and how kind of important it's really been to American history. You mentioned battlefields and all that. I skipped over that earlier. That was definitely a part of it. What's the military history here too? So that's a whole section of the book.
I was gonna say those old buildings are just so beautiful. Like those are my favorite things I think for us to research just because they have some of the most interesting history because of how old they are, and then also like the structure of them is just beautiful to look at.
Yeah, you definitely, there's a lot of ugly construction in mini malls and that sort of thing. And it's a real
Yeah.
shame. An old building just sometimes as Mother Nature wins or whatever, falls into disrepair if it's 200, 300 years old. We're really fortunate in this area to have things that are still standing, and they've either been repurposed back to their original use, like a tavern or a public house or that sort of thing, or there are like historical societies taken up in them, like the Red Rose Inn, which is probably the closest one of the sites to where I live. It's just off Route 1 in Jennersville here, and it's like super close to the roadway. The building has been, part dilapidated over the years, but they've restored it. But the history goes back to 300 years ago, and it's you don't get that in other parts of the country, or hopefully these buildings can kind of withstand the test of time even more, because they're pushing it in some cases. But a lot of the places around here are in pretty good shape still, that are still operational as a business or a historical society.
Yeah, and something that I loved about the book is that you do group it by category like that. So it's things like public houses, like you mentioned. And when you're talking about the road trip, you say that even though it's by category, that's why you have the GPS coordinates so that people can, plug it in and plan their own way. What made you decide to include those coordinates? I know you said that you liked going yourself, but what made you push that extra mile to include those?
I just wanted to narrow it down really specifically. Obviously, say if it's Stottsville Inn or something, like here's the coordinates to it. But some of them I got very specific with, like the ticking tomb. I think I had it all zoomed in like completely, or one of the times I was there standing at it, I like dropped a pin. So I really wanted to narrow it down to specific spots where it was. Sometimes you get in the area and you're not really sure, or like the Potter's Field, for instance, that can be kind of tricky. It's part of the Chesland Preserve, and you park like across a road and you walk through this field, and it's all very nice. Although when I went, it was January, so everything was kind of dead, and it was just like a cold 10 or 15 minute walk, and then kind of there's an open clearing, and that's where the Potter's Field is. And I hadn't really seen that talked about very much anywhere, and I wanted to kind of pinpoint exactly where it was, even though you can't just drive up to it. You have to park quarter-mile away to walk to it. But yeah, I just wanted to be as specific as possible without intruding on private property or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful because, again, I grew up in Chester County and
Right.
there were places I hadn't even heard of in here. So I am encouraging my family that still lives there, get the book and go look at the GPS
Right.
coordinates. And next time I'm home visiting family, it's amazing to just be able to put that in. You make it so accessible. For those watching
Mhm.
the video, I'm holding up the page where you can look at the road trip stops, which is amazing to me.
Yeah, just go in that loop, in that order, or wherever you're closest to. Start in the middle, and then just keep working your way around, and then to the end and back to the front. Skip over some things. I always, I'm like a road trip planner. When we are going somewhere on vacation, like we're going up to New England in a few months, and I'm already looking at first. I'm always looking on for local like breweries and things like that, but then like comic shops and collectible stores and all that, just as much for us as for the kids. So just like kind of, and obviously you want to get like a local flavor too, but that's where you find some of the really interesting stuff is just these downtown areas. Some of these, like we're going to Portland and Bangor in Maine, do some like Stephen King site hunting, I guess. And so that stuff's always a lot of fun to just kind of get that something you only get in one place. And then like Chester County, just like a lot of other portions of Pennsylvania, has that very specific places that you can only get here. And that's great that as a resident here or somebody that grew up here, that you didn't know everything that was in the book already. So I did at least a half decent job of finding some things and uncovering some things. And hopefully it's not just old hat. I'm trying to just repeat generic ghost stories. I'm talking about inns and taverns. There's a 40-year-old book that I found that detailed a lot of things that I hadn't really read about anywhere else. So I wanted to include information about or from that book and explore it even further.
Yeah, and you do have a really comprehensive bibliography in the back of the book, which I think is great. When we're talking about hauntings, I think people could be very, very skeptical, right? So it's cool to me that you have such a comprehensive bibliography and that you include the history. Obviously, on our podcast, we value history and hauntings, but why, to you, in your own words, do you think the history is so important to include as well?
I guess that will kind of always spur you on to look for more if you know about what's happened in a place before. It just kind of might pique your interest. You never know what direction the history will go. And some of these places, they have not only like a haunted history, they might be very historically significant, something to do with the Underground Railroad or portions of the American Revolution. So it's not just a linear sort of thing where, oh, this place has just been a tavern for 200 years. Like there's a lot of twists and turns in there where it was, fallen into disrepair and became like a boarding house or that sort of thing. I just think that you always just kind of have a learning mentality. So you got to kind of look to the past to, it sounds like a cliche teacher sort of thing, but then that will kind of inform not necessarily your opinions, but just your passions going forward.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite things I think about researching the paranormal and kind of like sharing it with people is that, the paranormal can kind of get people interested. And then if you're
Mhm.
also discussing the history, it's like they get to learn about the places that they've located, that they've been in their entire lives, which is like super important, I think, to just human lives in general.
Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of a devious way. It's like teaching you while you're like looking for ghost stories, or it's just like this multi-pronged approach that's like something for everyone. And that's what the whole point of the book really is, that maybe you don't like one of the essays, or the site doesn't appeal to you, or it seems not as interesting. Just a couple pages later, there's something else which hopefully will kind of re-engage you, because it's not, a narrative book or whatever. It's just basically a collection of essays. I wanted to just be like snapshots of history. If there's hauntings, that's great. That's the whole point of it. And that is a format I don't see very much around. So I wanted to try to, instead of just being like this straightforward, like book spooky stories, interject my own opinions and like a sarcastic skepticism in there as well. Because, I'm an enthusiast about it, even though I haven't had anything really out of the ordinary or weird happen to me specifically. I still kind of like to pursue it. And I think that kind of goes back to childhood too. And reading Goosebumps and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, something so interesting is in your biography, it says that you used to write paranormal stories for your parents as a kid. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I definitely like didn't know about copyright at that time, so I was, Freddy Krueger jumped out and did something or whatever using licensed characters, and hopefully not getting in trouble for that retroactively. But I'm an only child, and I feel like the whole imagination part had to take off. It's kind of, playing on your own with your action figures in your room, that sort of situation. My parents are always great in supporting me for just being imaginative and kind of reading. And that, for some reason, like with kids, and I see it with my own, it's like they like the spooky stuff when they're little. So I mentioned Goosebumps, scary stories to tell in the dark, that sort of thing. It's just something that's like really accessible from a young age for some reason, and that builds up not necessarily a tolerance, but I guess just sort of like this, I don't know, just kind of healthy fear in a way underneath or whatever. And it's just always, if it's something you can't like see and touch and it's got ghosts or monsters or something involved, it's they always would read my stories that I wrote for them and some other relatives and everything, and humored me to some degree. But that's what an 8 or a 10-year-old writes, I guess, more so than just, they're not going to write, I don't know, a romance novel or something like that. They write what they know, and from a young age it seems to be like ghosts and monsters for some reason. That's not been my primary focus. I've been writing mostly about sports for several years, but this gave me a chance to just, not necessarily writing ghost stories, but writing about these accounts.
Yeah, and you mentioned sports. You do have another book, I'm
Mhm.
Getting a Sports Complex. So
Mhm.
what made you shift from that topic to kind of back to your childhood storytelling, but from more of a researched lens now?
Yeah, I guess it's not exactly like fatigue from sports, because I could always just watch that and talk about it and write about it all day. And I do plan on writing another one, kind of an updated thing about my life as a Philadelphia sports fan. But I think it was just, we came to, like, I'm from Delaware originally. Spoiler alert, the state of Delaware, but spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania and Chester County, worked in Chester County for about a dozen years, even before moving here. Same reasons people always do, like more space and better school district and that sort of thing. And then being here on an everyday basis really just made me appreciate the area a whole lot, and wanted to do something local. And like just kind of thinking about what that meant. And it seems like every quadrant of the country has its folklore and legends and ghosts and everything. And this is like the most fertile ground for it. So once I started looking into that, I realized, hey, there might be enough for a book here. And because there definitely are some about ghosts of the Brandywine Valley and all these books I would look at, but I wanted to just keep it Chester County specific. Maybe branch out in future editions. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to just go right in the backyard, and essentially my own backyard, and find things really spooky and interesting and historical to write about.
Yeah, and if there was one message that you could tell people about the paranormal, what would that be?
I think that whether or not you are like a believer in it or not, or you're on the fence like I am, it's a worthwhile subject to try to get to the bottom of. Almost all the major religions in the world are kind of based on the concept of the spirit and heaven and afterlife and that sort of thing. And that kind of goes hand in hand with, it's something that we can't see or touch all the time. And it's really just about, if you're looking for something paranormal or whatever you want to call it, it's expanding your understanding and knowledge, I think. Because I just always found it fascinating, and I don't think you can believe in some greater spirituality without at least entertaining the idea of ghosts and the paranormal. Doesn't mean you're like totally all invested in it, but I feel like there's always that curious part of people's minds, and of mine certainly, that hey, is there some more to this? And I don't actively go ghost hunting and all that. It would be cool to do sometime. I haven't really had any time to do that. I try to, explore it in my own ways by like digging into the history of places.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is your favorite story of the locations that you have included in the book?
Oh man, I have to look at it real quick. The favorite story, the one that I keep coming to because it's kind of unbelievable in terms of history, is the one about Mad Anthony Wayne and the bones. So it's a cheater story because a lot of the action does not, it takes place up in Eerie, of course, right? But the fact that you have this Anthony Wayne was a hero of the American Revolution, and he dies some years later. He dies at an outpost in Eerie, and they bury him there, and that's it. But then 13 years later or so, his family decides to bring his body back east, his bones, thinking that that would be what happened. They open his coffin up, and he's not really decomposed. So they decide, oh, we only have room to fit the bones, so we better cut him up and boil him, and then dump the dump his remains in Erie, and then take the bones across the state. And yeah, it's just a wild ride. And actually, I was just watching Last Week Tonight with John Oliver a couple weeks ago, and he randomly just brought that story up for some
Oh,
reason. Yeah, I was like, oh, it's spoiling what's in my book, really. And then I saw some story about the Erie Tourism Board inviting him to go look at the cauldron they boiled Anthony Wayne in and things. So we'll see if more comes out of that. But that's a really wild story. And then Duffy's Cut is really interesting as well. Was it like a mass murder in the 1800s when there was originally thought to be some kind of outbreak of cholera or some kind of communicable disease? Just stories that seem kind of made up, but they're not.
yeah, I think the more you dig into things, like you said, the more you find these really interesting small stories. I
Mm-hmm.
love the Wayne story, the General Wayne story, because it's just so completely outlandish to me. And
Yeah.
I ran across it when we did the Paoli battlefield, which I actually didn't even
Mhm.
realize was there. And yeah, I agree. That's one of my favorite ghost stories, or just more like macabre stories, because it's so.
Yeah, it's gruesome, absolutely. And I know you guys have covered a lot of the spots in the book too, like the Blue Ball Inn and Penhurst and all that. So I try to just add a little bit more to it. But yeah, the Anthony Wayne thing and I also found out about him being at Paoli at the massacre, and he's like memorialized on the obelisk they have there, even though he really didn't do anything. And then the rumor is, and this is in the book as well, that he basically escaped capture or death that night by turning his coat inside out to show the red lining on the outside, and the British thinking that he was with them, and that's the origin of the phrase "turncoat." Supposedly, is the rumor around that, but who knows? It's a good story, even if it's not accurate.
Yeah. Oh, that's the like little pieces of history to me that make it so interesting, because you have the eerie story and this ghost that's very interesting, but then you have this larger than life character as well, thinking about how he lived.
Yes, Anthony Wayne's in there. You'll see Sandy Flash, James Fitzpatrick. He occurs a couple times. He has ties to a few of the places. He met a very grisly demise as well that everybody can read about in the book if they're not aware of it already. He was basically like a Robin Hood type character in the countryside here. But you have Free Love Valley, all this basically like this cult that was just dancing around in Chester County in the mid 1800s, and I didn't even know it got this weird. But truth is stranger than fiction, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely. Erica, any additional questions?
Actually, yes, I was curious when you were like researching places, and I know you said you had been to the library and kind of like writing alongside that. Was your family involved at all? Like, did you guys take trips together? Did they help you research things?
Yeah, my wife definitely. We went on a road trip of 4 or 5 stops while I was writing it, including Anthony Wayne's grave, the Duffy's Cut site. There's a bunch that are kind of that are doable in one day or an afternoon, even. They're kind of clustered around like the whole Malvern area. So yeah, she went with me to kind of explore some sites, and she's also a pretty good writer herself, and so she had her proofreading and editing some of my content along the way. It was a big help.
That's so great. That's so nice.
Yeah, it's great. She's got a lot of talent with that, and we met working for a radio station several years ago, and we're in promotions, but also some on-air work. She did a lot more than me. She was a lot better than me. She was really good at it. So it's a shame nobody can make any money in radio anymore. She would have been great to just keep that up, but we do what we can to make ends meet, and then we do things we're passionate about, like this when we have the time.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely amazing to have found the time to write such a comprehensive, well-researched book in spare time. It's very inspiring to me. Like I
Yeah,
said,
and I tried to
especially as
keep
someone
it.
that grew up in the area.
Yeah, and things in this genre they don't go on for hundreds of pages, so it's tight. And I feel like the font is also very small now. They crammed a lot in here, so they could have stretched it out a little bit. But it was kind of a dream come true to get a physical contract in the mail. Like I hadn't gotten assurances that it was coming. I just checked the mail one day and a physical contract was there. Like how often does that happen anymore? And it was a long process and all that, but it's a lot of fun. And this is great.
Yeah, I am so happy to have read it and to have gotten a
Thank
copy
you.
of it. Thank you so much. If people are interested, like I said in the intro, you can actually meet Kevin at the Exton Barnes and Noble on May 3rd from 12 to 3. You can purchase the book and his other book on Amazon. I'll link his page in the description of this episode. Kevin, any final thoughts for our listeners?
Not just that they're lucky to be listening to you folks putting on a podcast here, and it's great when you switch it up too from Pennsylvania topics to just kind of throw something else random in there too. It's always interesting to me too. What else you guys pick? And you've definitely brought up some places that are on my checklist now. I have to go here, I have to go there. So I'm glad we're helping each other with that. And your podcast is one of the first outlets that I thought of when I was, you kind of go like, do your own media or publicity for this. I'm like, this would be kind of great because this is we're doing the same thing here. Is talk about get out and see
Mhm.
your local stuff. We can't all be world travelers. There's a bunch of interesting stuff like just a couple blocks away if you want to go look for it and all that. So explore while you can.
Absolutely. And thank you again so much for being on here. We're so happy to have gotten to talk to you, to read the book. I've already, like I said, told all my family, like, you guys have to. I won't let anybody read my advance copy. I won't even let them look at
Okay,
it. I'm
great.
like, you have to go buy your own if you
Thank
guys
you.
want to get the content. So definitely, if you are in Pennsylvania or traveling to Pennsylvania or just interested in history and hauntings, be sure to check it out. Pick up your own copy. You can get it on Amazon and it can be to you in like a few days. So definitely. Thank you so much, Kevin, for hopping on.
Thank you, Sarah and Eric. It was really a pleasure. Appreciate it.